December 10, 1941. Imperial Japanese Navy Headquarters, Tokyo. Commander Mochitsura Hashimoto reviewed intelligence reports on the American submarine fleet with barely concealed amusement. 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Japanese naval officers gathered to assess threats to their newly expanded Pacific Empire. American submarines ranked low on their concerns. Hashimoto read aloud from the assessment. The American submarine force numbers approximately 50 vessels. Their torpedoes are unreliable. Their tactics are cautious. Their commanders lack aggressive spirit. Assessment: minimal threat to operations. He set down the report. The Americans build good surface ships. But submarines? They do not understand submarine warfare. The room nodded in agreement. Japanese submarines had achieved early successes. American submarines, by contrast, seemed designed for defensive coastal operations rather than offensive commerce raiding. What Japanese naval intelligence failed to recognize was that American submarine doctrine was about to undergo the most dramatic transformation in naval history. By 1945, American submarines would destroy over 55% of Japan's merchant fleet and cripple the island nation's ability to wage conflict. The mockery was understandable, given initial performance. In the first 6 months following Pearl Harbor, American submarines conducted over 350 patrols and fired over 2,400 torpedoes. They sank approximately 180,000 tons of Japanese shipping. The results were disappointing relative to effort expended. Japanese planners noted the ineffectiveness and dismissed the submarine threat. The problem was not the submarines themselves. The Gado-class boats entering service were excellent platforms with good range, adequate speed, and comfortable habitability. The crews were well trained and motivated. The doctrine emphasized aggressive patrol in enemy waters. On paper, everything looked correct. The problem was the torpedoes. The Mark 14 torpedo, standard weapon of the American submarine fleet, suffered from catastrophic flaws that would take over 2 years to identify and correct. The magnetic exploder designed to detonate beneath enemy ships frequently failed. The contact exploder often failed upon direct impact. The depth control mechanism ran deeper than set, causing torpedoes to pass harmlessly beneath targets. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton, commanding USS Wahoo, described the frustration in his patrol report from February 1942. Fired 4 torpedoes at convoy from optimal position, range 800 yards. 3 hit target amidships, no explosions. 4th passed beneath without detonating. Target continued on course. The torpedoes are defective. Every submarine commander knows this. Yet Bureau of Ordnance insists the torpedoes are functioning correctly. The torpedo failures had multiple causes. The Mark 14 had never been properly tested before deployment due to cost concerns. Full-scale testing with live warheads was considered too expensive. When submarines began reporting failures, the Bureau of Ordnance attributed problems to crew error rather than design flaws. This institutional denial created dangerous conditions. Submarine commanders risked their boats and crews to achieve optimal attack positions, only to watch torpedoes fail repeatedly. Crew morale suffered. Commanders became cautious, knowing successful attacks required hitting targets multiple times to ensure at least some torpedoes would function. Japanese naval planners observed American submarine operations during 1942 and drew incorrect conclusions. They saw submarines making cautious approaches, firing multiple torpedoes at single targets, and often failing to sink ships despite apparent hits. The natural interpretation was that American submarine crews were poorly trained or lacked fighting spirit. Admiral Osami Nagano, chief of the Naval General Staff, summarized the assessment in a September 1942 briefing. American submarines pose minimal threat to our logistics. Their operations have been ineffective. Our convoy system, while modest, appears adequate to protect merchant shipping. Resources allocated to anti-submarine warfare can be reduced and redirected to offensive operations. This assessment would prove catastrophically wrong. Japanese merchant ships traveled in loosely organized convoys with minimal escort. Anti-submarine warfare received low priority. The merchant marine expanded to support operations across the vast Pacific with minimal protection. What Japanese planners failed to recognize was that American submariners were systematically identifying and solving their torpedo problems despite institutional resistance. Commanders conducted unauthorized tests, compared notes, and developed workarounds. By mid-1943, the torpedo failures were finally acknowledged and corrected. When reliable torpedoes reached the fleet, American submarines would transform from nuisance to existential threat. The geographic situation favored submarine operations against Japan. The Japanese home islands possessed minimal natural resources. Oil came from the Dutch East Indies. Rubber came from Malaya. Rice came from Taiwan and Southeast Asia. Everything required to sustain the Japanese economy and military had to be transported by sea across thousands of miles of ocean. This logistical vulnerability was well understood by Japanese planners, but they assumed their navy would protect the sea lanes through surface superiority. The assumption failed to account for the vast distances involved. The Pacific was simply too large for any navy to control completely. Submarines operating submerged were difficult to detect with 1940s technology. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Dealey, who would become one of the most successful submarine commanders, explained the advantage in a 1943 interview. "The ocean is enormous. A submarine is tiny. We can be anywhere. The Japanese cannot protect every square mile of ocean. We go where they are weak. We attack when they are vulnerable. We disappear before they can respond." October 1943 marked the turning point. After nearly 2 years of frustration, American submarines finally had reliable torpedoes. The magnetic exploder had been deactivated. The depth control mechanism was recalibrated. The contact exploder was redesigned. For the first time since the conflict began, submarine commanders could attack with confidence that their weapons would function. The impact was immediate and dramatic. In the last quarter of 1943, American submarines sank over 300,000 tons of Japanese shipping. This exceeded the total for the entire first year of the conflict. Japanese merchant losses began accelerating as more submarines with reliable torpedoes reached patrol areas. USS Wahoo, under Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton, demonstrated the potential of aggressive submarine operations. In January 1943, Wahoo conducted a patrol in the Sea of Japan itself, the body of water surrounded by the Japanese home islands. Morton attacked ships in waters the Japanese considered safe. He used radar to track targets at night. He conducted surface attacks when conditions permitted. Wahoo's patrol demonstrated that American submarines could operate anywhere, even in Japan's home waters. The psychological impact was significant. Japanese merchant captains who believed themselves safe in coastal waters discovered that nowhere was truly secure. The development of effective radar gave American submarines a decisive advantage in night operations. Japanese ships lacked radar in 1943. American submarines could detect targets at ranges of 10,000 yards or more in complete darkness. This allowed submarines to track convoys, maneuver into attack positions, and launch torpedoes before targets knew they were under threat. Commander Richard O'Kane, executive officer on Wahoo and later commander of USS Tang, described the tactical revolution. Radar changed everything. We could see them. They could not see us. We surfaced at night, tracked convoys, got ahead of them, and attacked from the darkness. By the time they realized what was happening, we had fired and were diving. It was devastatingly effective. The Japanese response to increasing submarine attacks was hampered by multiple factors. Anti-submarine warfare had never been a priority for the Imperial Navy. Most destroyers were designed for fleet actions rather than convoy escort. Sonar equipment was inferior to American systems. Tactical doctrine for convoy protection was underdeveloped. More critically, Japan faced a resource allocation dilemma. Every destroyer assigned to convoy escort was a destroyer unavailable for fleet operations. Japanese strategic thinking remained focused on decisive fleet engagement rather than protecting logistics. This created opportunities American submariners exploited ruthlessly. The geographic choke points through which Japanese shipping had to pass became killing zones. The Luzon Strait between Taiwan and the Philippines channeled traffic into predictable routes. The approaches to Singapore and the Dutch East Indies became submarine patrol areas where American boats waited for targets. Captain Roy Davenport, commanding USS Hake, described operations near the Philippines in late 1943. We would position ourselves along known shipping routes and wait. Targets appeared almost daily. Convoys, individual merchants, tankers. We attacked at night when possible, submerged during day. The hunting was extraordinary. We were limited only by torpedo loadouts. The human dimension of the submarine campaign was brutal. Merchant sailors on torpedoed ships faced terrible choices. Many could not swim. Lifeboats were limited. Rescue was unlikely in hostile waters far from land. Thousands of Japanese merchant seamen perished in the waters of the Pacific. American submarine crews did not escape unscathed. Submarine operations were among the most dangerous assignments in any navy. Equipment failures, depth charge attacks, mines, and aircraft posed constant threats. Of the 288 American submarines that conducted patrols during the conflict, 52 were lost with all hands. The submarine force represented less than 2% of American naval personnel, but suffered over 20% of naval casualties. Yet volunteers kept coming. Submarine duty paid extra. The boats had better food than surface ships. Most importantly, submariners believed they were making a decisive contribution. Every ship sunk was tonnage Japan could not replace. Every tanker destroyed was oil Japan desperately needed. By early 1944, the submarine campaign's cumulative effect was becoming apparent in Japan. Oil imports from the Dutch East Indies were falling. Food imports from Southeast Asia were declining. Industrial production was constrained by lack of raw materials. The merchant marine was shrinking faster than shipyards could build replacements. Japanese shipyards launched approximately 3.3 million tons of merchant shipping during the conflict. American submarines sank over 5 million tons. The mathematics were unsustainable. Every month, Japan's merchant fleet shrank. Every month, the ability to transport resources diminished. Admiral Nagano, whose 1942 assessment had dismissed the submarine threat, revised his evaluation in March 1944. American submarine operations have exceeded all projections. Our merchant losses are severe and accelerating. Convoy protection is inadequate. Anti-submarine forces are insufficient. We are losing the logistics battle. But recognition came too late. Japan's industrial capacity was already strained. Diverting resources to build escort vessels meant fewer resources for aircraft and warships. Training crews for anti-submarine warfare meant fewer crews for offensive operations. The American submarine force, meanwhile, was reaching peak effectiveness. New boats entered service regularly. Crews gained experience and confidence. Tactics improved through shared lessons. Command became more aggressive. The combination created a force that dominated the undersea battlefield. By mid-1944, American submarines had established complete dominance over Japanese sea lanes. The monthly sinking rate exceeded 200,000 tons. Tankers became priority targets, and their loss crippled Japanese military operations. Without fuel, the combined fleet could not sortie. Without fuel, aircraft could not fly. Without fuel, the economy could not function. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 demonstrated the cumulative impact. The Japanese fleet sortied with limited fuel, forcing tactical decisions based on fuel constraints rather than optimal strategy. Aircraft had insufficient training time due to fuel shortages. The resulting battle was catastrophic for Japanese naval aviation, with over 600 aircraft lost. Submarine operations contributed directly. USS Albacore torpedoed the carrier Taiho, newest and largest in the Japanese fleet. USS Cavalla sank the carrier Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor. Both carriers succumbed to submarine attacks during the battle. The campaign against tankers intensified throughout 1944. Commander Slade Cutter, commanding USS Seahorse, specialized in hunting tankers in the South China Sea. His October 1944 patrol sank 4 tankers totaling 40,000 tons. Each represented fuel Japan desperately needed and could not replace. Cutter described the strategic impact in his patrol report. Every tanker we sink is fuel that never reaches Japan. Every barrel of oil lost is fuel not powering aircraft, ships, or industry. We are draining their lifeblood. The oil fields are in the Dutch East Indies. Japan is 3,000 miles away. We sit in between and pick off the tankers. The Japanese response grew increasingly desperate. Convoy sizes increased to concentrate escorts. Routes were varied to avoid submarine patrol areas. Ships hugged coastlines where shallow water restricted submarine operations. None of these measures proved adequate. American submarines had multiple advantages that Japanese countermeasures could not negate. Ultra-intelligence derived from breaking Japanese codes provided information on convoy routes and schedules. Radar allowed detection and tracking regardless of visibility. Reliable torpedoes meant attacks succeeded when pressed home aggressively. American submarine crews also paid the price. USS Tang, commanded by Richard O'Kane, conducted 5 spectacularly successful patrols, sinking 24 ships. On her 5th patrol in October 1944, Tang's own torpedo malfunctioned, circled, and struck the submarine. Tang sank in 180 feet of water. Only 9 crew members survived, including O'Kane. The other 78 perished. USS Wahoo, under Morton's aggressive command, conducted 6 successful patrols before being lost with all hands in October 1943 in the Sea of Japan. Morton's aggressive tactics had made him legendary among submariners, but the odds eventually turned against him. Despite losses, the submarine campaign continued relentlessly. By late 1944, Japan's merchant fleet had shrunk to approximately 2 million tons from a peak of over 6 million tons in 1941. The decline crippled the economy. Factories closed for lack of raw materials. Food shortages became severe. The oil situation became critical. In 1941, Japan imported approximately 5 million tons of oil annually. By late 1944, imports had fallen to under 1 million tons. The shortfall paralyzed military operations. The combined fleet sat idle in port. Aircraft training was curtailed. Admiral Somu Toyota, commanding the combined fleet, addressed the crisis in an October 1944 staff conference. "We have ships but no fuel to operate them. We have aircraft but no fuel to fly them. The American submarine campaign has severed our logistics. We are being strangled. Unless oil imports increase dramatically, our ability to resist will collapse within months." The situation worsened in early 1945. American submarines now operated with near impunity. Japanese anti-submarine forces were depleted and demoralized. The waters around Japan became a free fire zone for American submarines. Commander George Street, commanding USS Tirante, conducted surface gun attacks against Japanese ships in harbor. On April 14, 1945, Tirante penetrated a Japanese harbor, sank 2 ships with torpedoes, and withdrew while under fire from shore batteries. Such aggressive operations were now possible because Japanese defenses were so weakened. The final statistics told the story of complete maritime dominance. Between December 1941 and August 1945, American submarines sank 1,178 Japanese merchant ships, totaling over 5 million tons. They also sank 214 warships, including 1 battleship, 8 aircraft carriers, and 11 cruisers. This represented approximately 55% of all Japanese merchant tonnage lost and 30% of all warships lost during the conflict. The submarine force accomplished this with 288 boats conducting patrols. At any given time, only about 75 submarines were on patrol. The force represented less than 2% of American naval personnel, but inflicted disproportionate damage on Japanese logistics and naval power. The American submarine campaign against Japan stands as one of the most successful commerce destruction operations in naval history. It demonstrated principles that remain relevant today. Economic warfare can be as decisive as conventional combat. Technological advantages multiply with proper tactics, and institutional failures must be overcome through initiative and adaptation. The psychological transformation from December 1941 to August 1945 was complete. Japanese naval officers who had mocked American submarines in 1941 watched helplessly as those same submarines destroyed their merchant fleet and crippled their nation's economy. The mockery turned to respect, then fear, then resignation. For American submariners, the campaign vindicated their aggressive tactics and willingness to challenge defective equipment despite institutional resistance. Commanders who reported torpedo failures were initially accused of incompetence. Their persistence in documenting problems eventually forced corrections. This transformation from defective weapons to reliable torpedoes was as important as any tactical innovation. The industrial dimension cannot be overlooked. America built 203 submarines during the conflict, replacing all losses and expanding the force. Japan built fewer than 200 submarines and most were lost. American submarines could refit and rearm at forward bases. Japanese submarines often had to return to home waters for significant repairs. The human element remained central. Of 16,000 men who served in American submarines during the conflict, 3,500 perished. This casualty rate of 22% was the highest of any branch of American military service. Yet volunteers never stopped coming. The submarine force maintained high morale despite horrific losses. Japanese merchant sailors suffered even more severely. Approximately 116,000 Japanese merchant seamen served during the conflict. Over 60,000 perished, a casualty rate exceeding 50%. Many drowned when ships sank. Others perished from exposure in lifeboats. The merchant marine was decimated. The strategic impact extended beyond simple tonnage sunk. The submarine campaign forced Japan to divert resources to anti-submarine warfare that could have been used elsewhere. Destroyer construction shifted toward escort vessels. Aircraft were assigned to patrol rather than offensive operations. These diversions weakened Japanese capability. The campaign also demonstrated the importance of intelligence. Ultra-intercepts provided American submarines with targeting information that dramatically improved effectiveness. Knowing convoy routes and schedules allowed submarines to position themselves optimally. This intelligence advantage multiplied the impact of every submarine on patrol. Modern analysis consistently ranks the American submarine campaign as one of the decisive factors in the Pacific conflict. While carriers and amphibious operations received more publicity, submarines quietly destroyed Japan's ability to sustain operations. Without resources transported by merchant ships, the Japanese military could not function. General Douglas MacArthur acknowledged this in his post-war assessment. The submarine campaign was decisive. It destroyed Japanese logistics more effectively than any other single factor. Submarines made possible every advance by cutting enemy supply lines and preventing reinforcement. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz was even more direct. The submarine force destroyed more Japanese shipping than all other forces combined. They strangled Japan's economy and crippled her military. The submarine campaign will be recognized as one of the most important factors in Allied victory. For Japan, the submarine campaign represented a strategic miscalculation with catastrophic consequences. The dismissal of the submarine threat in 1941-1942 allowed American submarines to develop tactics and overcome equipment problems without facing adequate countermeasures. By the time Japanese leadership recognized the danger, the submarine force was too effective to counter. The broader lesson transcends the specific historical circumstance. Underestimating enemy capabilities based on initial poor performance is dangerous. The American submarine force in December 1941 was indeed ineffective due to torpedo failures. But once the torpedo problems were solved, the force became devastatingly effective. Japanese planners who dismissed the threat based on 1942 performance failed to recognize that circumstances could change rapidly. The cultural dimension also played a role. Japanese naval doctrine emphasized decisive fleet engagement. Submarines were supporting assets, not primary weapons. This doctrinal bias prevented Japanese leadership from recognizing that American submarines posed an existential threat to an island nation dependent on maritime commerce. American submariners, unconstrained by such cultural prejudices, embraced unrestricted submarine warfare. They attacked any vessel in enemy waters. This ruthless approach was strategically effective. The campaign succeeded because American submariners were willing to target the economic infrastructure supporting Japanese military operations. When Commander Hashimoto reviewed intelligence assessments in December 1941 and dismissed American submarines as minimal threat, he made a reasonable judgment based on available information. What he could not foresee was that American submarine force culture would prove adaptable, aggressive, and lethal once equipment problems were solved. By 1945, Hashimoto himself commanded submarine I-58. On July 30th, his submarine torpedoed USS Indianapolis, sinking her with heavy loss of life. But this isolated success could not change the larger reality. American submarines had destroyed Japanese merchant marine and crippled the island nation's economy. The final irony was that Hashimoto survived to see the vindication of submarine warfare. Not Japanese submarine warfare, but American. The force he had dismissed in 1941 had proven decisive. The merchant fleet he assumed would be adequately protected lay at the bottom of the Pacific. 75 years later, military analysts studying the Pacific conflict consistently identify the submarine campaign as a case study in effective maritime interdiction. Modern navies train in anti-submarine warfare, knowing that submarines remain among the most dangerous weapons in any fleet. The laughter that greeted American submarines in December 1941 had long since ceased by August 1945. Japanese naval officers who survived acknowledged that underestimating the submarine threat was a critical strategic failure. The force they had mocked had strangled their nation's economy and contributed decisively to defeat. For the submariners who volunteered for dangerous duty, who fought with defective torpedoes until problems were fixed, who developed tactics that revolutionized submarine warfare, and who ultimately destroyed over half of Japan's merchant fleet, the transformation from dismissed to dominant represented vindication. The American submarine campaign against Japan remains one of naval history's most successful operations. It demonstrated that economic warfare conducted systematically can be as decisive as conventional combat. It proved that small forces properly employed can achieve strategic impact. And it showed that initial failures, if addressed honestly and corrected rapidly, need not prevent ultimate success. Those lessons remain valid today.